He walked into the city's most expensive restaurant like he owned it until he saw who was serving table 17, his black, pregnant ex-wife. Her eyes locked on him, her hands steady, and in that instant the years of silence shattered. His face went pale like a man staring at the one person who could destroy him. The soft clink of cutlery and low jazz filled the air, masking the quiet storms people carried to dinner. In the city's most expensive restaurant, a man in a tailored suit walked in like he owned the night. He had no idea that at table 17, his past was about to stand up and stare back at him. Her hands trembled, her eyes locked, the years of silence collapsing in an instant. And when he finally saw her, the color drained from his face, as if he'd just met a ghost who knew his deepest sin. He stood frozen, the hum of the restaurant fading into a hollow silence inside his skull. At the far end of the room, beneath the warm amber glow of a chandelier, she was there, tray in hand, hair pulled back, an unfamiliar weight in her posture. Not just older, but changed. Her eyes no longer searched for him the way they once had. They cut through him like glass. The years had drawn shadows beneath her cheekbones, but there was a new kind of light too, the steady, dangerous glow of a woman who'd learned to survive without him. Her uniform clung tighter than it should have, stretched by the swell of a belly she carried like a shield. The last time he saw her, she was walking away with a suitcase and nothing else. Back then, he had told himself it was the right decision, that she didn't belong in the polished world he was building. But here she was, serving drinks in the very kind of place he once swore he'd never let her be seen in. And yet, it wasn't shame that gripped her. It was something colder. He cleared his throat, snapping his fingers the way he always did when he wanted to be noticed. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she approached, each step deliberate, steady as if she were walking through the ruins of their past with both hands on the matchbox. When she reached the table, she didn't look at the blonde woman by his side, didn't glance at the absurdly priced menu. She just looked at him, straight through him, and asked in a voice so calm it made his chest tighten, "Will you be ordering, sir?" The blonde blinked between them, sensing the static in the air. "You two know each other?" she asked, her tone a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. He hesitated, his jaw flexing. "We've crossed paths before." The words sounded like a lie even to him, and in her eyes he saw that she remembered every syllable of the night he'd chosen to erase her. But what he couldn't see, what no one in that room could see, was that she had not walked into his world tonight by accident. Her gaze didn't waver, not even when the blonde at his side leaned forward with a curious smirk. The silence between them was loud, every second pulling at old threads neither of them wanted to touch. She remembered every time he'd walked into a room like this with her on his arm, and every time he'd left her out of sight when he thought she didn't fit the picture. Now, here he was in his hand-stitched jacket, his custom cufflinks, looking at her as if the ground had shifted beneath him. The blonde cleared her throat. "So, how do you two know each other?" Her voice was casual, but her eyes were hunting for answers. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. At first, his hesitation was louder than any confession. "She's an old acquaintance," he finally muttered, but even he seemed to choke on the words. A 5-year marriage, condensed into 2 words meant to erase her entirely. Her lip curled, not enough for the blonde to notice, but enough for him to feel it. She thought of the night he had sent her away with nothing but a suitcase, and the unspoken truth that she didn't match the image he wanted to sell. The words he'd used then were polite, calculated. But now she could taste the truth behind them. It had never been about love fading. It had been about her never being the right type for the man he wanted to become. "Whose child is that?" he blurted suddenly, the question spilling out before his restraint could catch it. Her hands tightened on the tray, the plates trembling for just a moment before she steadied them again. "That's none of your concern." His companion's brows shot up, her perfectly painted lips parting. You didn't tell me you'd been married." Around them, a few tables grew quieter, the weight of curiosity drawing ears closer to their conversation. She refused to look away, even as the heat in the room seemed to rise. "Have you decided what you'll be having?" she asked, her tone clipped, purely professional. But she knew, and he knew, this wasn't a simple exchange of orders. This was the first move in a game he didn't even realize he was already playing, and she had been preparing for it far longer than he could imagine. His eyes wouldn't leave her belly. It wasn't the casual glance of a stranger, it was the desperate calculation of a man racing through timelines in his head. "How far along?" he asked, voice low, as if the blonde beside him couldn't hear. 7 months, she answered without hesitation, watching the relief flicker across his features when the numbers told him the child wasn't his. Relief that was all he could summon after years of shared life, shared dreams, and shared destruction. The blonde tilted her head, lips curling into a cold smile. "So, you're his ex-wife?" The word rang through the restaurant like a glass shattering on tile. A couple at the next table stopped mid-bite. A man at the bar subtly turned in his seat. She stood straighter, letting the label rest in the air. There was no shame left in it, only the weight of a story he could never rewrite. "I'll have someone else take your order," she said finally, turning to go. "Wait." His chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly, nearly knocking over a wineglass. Her back remained to him, but she could feel the pull of every eye in the room. "What do you want, Adrian?" "Just 5 minutes. Please." Her voice stayed even, almost detached. "You made it clear years ago we have nothing left to talk about." He remembered the night in his old living room, the taste of expensive whiskey on his tongue, as he told her she didn't fit in with the circles he moved in now. How he spoke about her like a burden to be managed instead of a woman to be loved. The blonde shifted uncomfortably, glancing around. "Adrian, this is getting weird. Let's go somewhere else." But he kept staring at her, not the way a man stares at an old flame, but like someone sensing a storm and realizing too late he's standing in its path. "How did you end up here?" he asked, genuine confusion threading his words. She turned just enough for their eyes to meet, and for the first time, he saw something in her gaze that made his stomach knot. Not grief, not bitterness, but patience. The kind of patience that waits years for the right moment to strike. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Life teaches you a lot," she said softly, "when you lose everything in one night." It wasn't the bitterness in her tone that unsettled him. It was the calm, as if she'd already made peace with a war he hadn't realized he was fighting. She adjusted the tray against her hip, the motion slow, deliberate, like she was moving pieces on a board only she could see. "Lena," he started, but she cut him off with the kind of precision only years of practice could bring. "Your order, sir?" Her voice was a shield now, polished and untouchable. The blonde beside him arched a brow, sensing the undercurrent, but more intrigued than threatened. But he didn't respond. He was too busy noticing that she was no longer the woman he'd once been able to bend with a single word. He tried to break her composure, his voice dropping. "You're different." "People change," she replied, tilting her head. "Some for the better." The way she said it landed heavy, a quiet blade sliding between the ribs of his pride. And just for a flicker of a moment, he saw something dangerous in her, not a threat she'd say out loud, but one she was willing to spend years making real. He sat back down slowly, but his pulse was racing. Every instinct told him this was more than a chance encounter. She hadn't just appeared here by coincidence. She had placed herself in his path. The only question was, why? Adrian's companion leaned back in her chair, twirling the stem of her glass as if this were just another round of entertainment in her evening. "So," she said, her tone dripping with casual cruelty, "this is the woman you forgot to mention?" The words hung in the air like smoke, curling into every corner of the room. A couple at the next table had stopped pretending not to listen. The low clink of plates from the kitchen was the only other sound. Lena's face didn't change. She'd learned long ago that the most cutting response was to give nothing. The truth, she knew, had a way of burning hotter when it wasn't fanned by anger. Instead, she simply asked, "Will that be the seafood special for you both?" It must be strange, waiting tables for a man you once called your husband, especially now. Her gaze drifted, slow and deliberate, to Lena's pregnant belly. Adrian shifted uncomfortably, but not out of sympathy, more like a man who realizes the mess is his to clean up if it spills. "I don't think we need to," he began, but the blonde's smirk only deepened. "Unless, maybe it's not so strange. Maybe it's just where you ended up when you couldn't keep up." The words might have sliced years ago. Tonight, they slid right off. Because Lena hadn't walked into this restaurant to defend herself, she'd walked in knowing exactly what was about to unfold. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was control. And as she jotted down their order, her mind replayed every late-night plan, every patient step, every calculated move she'd taken to make sure this meeting happened on her terms. Adrian was too distracted to notice, but she could see it in his posture. The unease had already begun to settle in his bones. And she knew this was only the first ripple of the storm she'd spent years preparing. Lena moved away from the table with the grace of someone who'd already won the round, leaving Adrian sitting in the hollow space she'd carved with her silence. His companion swirled her drink lazily, watching Lena's retreating figure like a cat studying a bird through glass. "She's different than I imagined," the blonde said, her voice pitched low but meant to be heard. "Not broken, which is interesting, considering you threw her away." Adrian's jaw tightened. That's not how it was. But the words lacked weight, even to him. Because somewhere deep down, he knew it was exactly how it was. He'd packaged her absence in respectable excuses, dressing cruelty as necessity. And now, here she was, standing tall in a place he thought she'd never belong, making him feel like the imposter. In the kitchen, Lena set the order slip down with steady hands. Her coworker glanced at her, sensing the tension radiating from the dining room. "Friend of yours?" "Something like that," she replied, eyes already drifting to the clock. She knew his habits better than he did, how long he lingered, how many times he checked his watch when uncomfortable. Every detail was a thread she'd been pulling for months, weaving a moment like this into being. Back at the table, the blonde leaned in close to Adrian. "You didn't tell me she was beautiful." Her tone was playful, but her gaze was sharp, testing him. He didn't answer. His eyes kept flicking toward the kitchen doors, waiting for Lena to reappear, not because he wanted to see her, but because he needed to know what she would do next. And somewhere, just beneath the polished surface of this high-end restaurant, something dangerous was coiling tight. Adrian could feel it, though he didn't yet understand that tonight wasn't about a chance meeting. It was about a reckoning that had been quietly counting down for years, and the clock had just struck its first second. Lena returned to the table with the drinks, her expression smooth, her steps unhurried, as though time itself had learned to move at her pace. She set the glasses down gently, the clink of crystal against wood slicing through the quiet tension like a muted warning. Adrian thanked her, but it was hollow, the kind of politeness people use when they're trying to keep the walls from caving in. The blonde leaned back, crossing her legs slowly, studying Lena as if she were a riddle that deserved to be solved in public. "I can't imagine what it's like," the blonde said, "to serve a man who replaced you." Her words were sugar-coated, but Lena could taste the venom underneath. She smiled faintly, a curve of lips that didn't reach her eyes. "You're right," she said softly. "You can't imagine." Adrian's fingers tightened around his glass, his pulse betraying him even as his face tried to remain composed. The air between them was shifting. Lena could feel it, a slow current pulling toward the moment she'd been waiting for. Every table around them seemed quieter now, the restaurant leaning in as if it knew a page was about to turn. She took one small step back, letting the silence swell, Her eyes locked on Adrian's with a steadiness that made his throat go dry. In those eyes, he saw no plea, no longing, only the measured certainty of someone who had already decided his fate. Her hand rested briefly on the edge of the table, a final touch before she turned toward the kitchen. But just as she began to walk away, she paused mid-step, glancing back over her shoulder. Her voice was low, almost kind, but every syllable landed with the weight of a promise. "Enjoy your meal, Adrian. You'll want the strength for what's coming next." The moment Lena vanished into the kitchen, Adrian felt his chest tighten, as if the walls of the restaurant had shifted an inch closer. His companion kept speaking something playful, something needling, but her words blurred into background noise. He was too busy watching the kitchen door, waiting, the way a man waits for a storm to hit even though the air has already gone still. When she returned, it wasn't with their food. Instead, she moved through the dining room with other waitstaff, each one carrying a neat stack of cream-colored envelopes. They were quiet, deliberate, placing one in front of every guest with the same precision as serving wine. The room began to hum with curiosity as fingertips slid over paper, pulling at seams, unfolding secrets. Adrian's hand shot out before the envelope could land in front of him. But the blonde had already taken it, unfolding the contents with a bright, almost hungry smile. The first page was a photograph him and Lena, years younger, standing hand in hand under a pale winter sky. The second was worse. A printed string of messages, his own words in black and white, sentences he'd thought would stay buried forever. At the next table, a man in a charcoal suit whispered something to his wife, both of them looking at Adrian with a shift in their eyes, not admiration now, but something sharper, colder. Page after page rustled open around the room, and the air filled with a quiet, spreading outrage. The blonde's smile dissolved into disbelief. "You told me. You told everyone you'd never been married." Her voice carried farther than she realized, and with it came a ripple of whispers that moved like wind through the restaurant. Adrian stood abruptly, but Lena was already at the center of the room. She stepped onto a low platform near the wine display, her hands resting lightly over her stomach, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "Since the truth has made its way to your tables," she began, her voice clear and steady, "let's not pretend we're strangers." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that bends the air and sharpens every heartbeat. "This," she said, gesturing toward Adrian without ever looking at him, "is the man who decided my existence was an inconvenience, who built his image on erasing me." She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to, every syllable cut with precision. "He thought the past could be rewritten. Tonight is just my way of reminding him. Some stories refuse to be buried." Adrian moved toward her, his jaw tight, but the blonde caught his arm, her eyes fixed on Lena as if seeing her for the first time. Around them, guests began closing their menus, leaving bills unpaid, walking out without another word. Contracts, conversations, reputations, all unraveling in the space of a few minutes, all under the glow of a chandelier that suddenly felt too bright. And in that collapsing moment, as the weight of years pressed down on Adrian's chest, Lena's eyes met his at last. Not with anger, not with triumph, but with the calm of someone who knew the ending long before the first move was made. And that calm whispered one truth in the space between them. This was only the beginning. Adrian's voice finally broke through the hush, low and strained. "Lena, stop this." But she didn't even glance his way. Instead, she turned toward a table near the front, where a silver-haired investor was holding the papers as if they were something toxic. "I imagine," she said evenly, "you prefer to know who you're trusting with your money before you hand it over." The man gave a short, sharp nod, then set the papers down as if washing his hands of them entirely. One by one, others followed quiet murmurs, chairs scraping against the polished floor, a procession of tailored suits and designer dresses slipping toward the exit. Adrian's pulse thundered as the room emptied in real time, each departing client another fracture in the empire he had built. The blonde finally let go of his arm. "You lied to me," she said, her voice brittle now, stripped of all its earlier amusement. "You lied to everyone." There was no scene, no shouting. She just picked up her clutch and walked out, leaving him standing under the oppressive weight of every gaze that hadn't yet turned away. Lena stepped down from the platform, her steps slow, deliberate, cutting through the wreckage she'd created like a conductor, walking off the stage after the final note. She stopped beside him, close enough for only him to hear. "You said I didn't fit into your world," she murmured. "So I built one where you don't exist." She didn't wait for a reply. Instead, she moved toward the door, her hand brushing lightly over her stomach, the faintest smile touching her lips as if she were holding a secret meant only for the life she carried. Behind her, Adrian stood in the center of the room, stripped of his audience, stripped of his control, surrounded only by the sound of his own undoing. And though the night was ending for him, she knew hers was just beginning, because the power she'd taken back tonight was something no one would ever take from her again. Outside, the night air wrapped around Lena like a quiet victory. The street was slick from a light rain, neon reflections bending across the pavement as if even the city itself was marking the shift in her story. Behind her, through the restaurant's tall windows, Adrian stood motionless, a figure trapped in the ruins of his own design. She didn't look back. Her steps were steady, carrying her toward the small sedan parked under the hum of a street lamp. When she opened the door, Daniel was there, the man who had seen her without needing to be convinced she was worth seeing. He smiled faintly, his hand instinctively brushing over hers before resting gently on her stomach. "Done?" he asked quietly. "Done," she replied. And it wasn't just the truth about tonight, it was the truth about every chain he had wrapped around her life. From this moment forward, she was no longer the woman who had been erased. She was the woman who had rewritten the ending. As they drove away, the glow of the restaurant faded into the distance, swallowed by the city. Her fingers traced idle circles over the life she carried, the faint kicks answering in return. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "You'll never know a world where love and dignity are separate things." And somewhere, deep inside, she understood the most lasting revenge was not his destruction. It was her freedom.